When Lila Hart stared at the grainy photo of her arranged marriage candidate, she braced herself for the most awkward dinner of her life. But she had no idea that the man walking up her front steps would shatter every expectation she'd ever had about love. What started as a reluctant family obligation was about to become the fight of her life. Because when a cruel social media post threatened to destroy everything they'd built together, Lila would have to choose between protecting her reputation and protecting the man who'd captured her heart. But Marcus Reed had been burned before by someone ashamed of who he was. And this time, he wasn't sure he could survive another betrayal. Especially not from the woman he was falling in love with. The question wasn't whether they belonged together. It was whether they'd have the courage to choose love over fear when the whole town was watching. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story of choosing love in the light will restore your faith in second chances. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Hart Inn's front office as Lila stared at her computer screen. The photo her mother had emailed stared back at her. A grainy image of a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dark circles under his eyes, an expression that seemed carved from stone, and what appeared to be the world's most unflattering lighting. "Marcus Reed," she whispered to herself, clicking the photo larger. It didn't help. The office door swung open with its familiar squeak. Evelyn Hart swept in carrying a stack of fresh towels, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the humid coastal air. "Have you looked at the photo I sent?" Evelyn asked, setting the towels on the counter with practiced efficiency. "I'm looking at it now." Lila minimized the screen and turned to face her mother. "Mom, I still don't understand why Pastor Glenn thinks this is a good idea." Evelyn's hands stilled on the towels. "He calls it a discernment dinner. Not an engagement, not vows, just a week to see if your values line up." She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from the top towel. "You're 29, honey. And after what happened with Richard was a mistake," Lila said quickly. "A well-dressed, well-connected mistake, who made me feel invisible in my own engagement. This is different. Marcus comes from a good family. He's steady, dependable." Lila caught the emphasis on dependable and felt her shoulders tense. "You mean he's not exciting?" "I mean he won't leave you for his secretary." The truth of Richard's betrayal still stung, even 2 years later. Lila had planned that wedding down to the last detail, only to discover her fiancé had been planning a very different future with someone else. A knock on the office door interrupted her thoughts. Tessa Morales peered around the frame, her nurse scrubs traded for jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt. "Sorry to interrupt. I brought those light bulbs for the guest bathroom." Tessa held up a small bag and caught sight of Lila's computer screen. "Oh my, is that your potential groom?" "Tessa," Lila warned. "What? I'm just saying he looks like his driver's license photo. You know, the kind they take after you've been waiting at the DMV for 3 hours. Tessa dropped into the chair across from Lila's desk. "When's this mysterious dinner happening?" "Tonight," Evelyn answered. 7 o'clock, just family and Pastor Glenn." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "And you're nervous because?" Lila gestured at the computer screen. "Look at him." "I am looking, and I'm seeing a tired-looking man in what appears to be a work uniform." Tessa leaned forward. "Lila, honey, you can't judge someone by their worst photo. Remember my dating profile picture where I looked like a startled owl?" Despite her anxiety, Lila smiled. "You met David through that photo." "Exactly my point." Tessa stood up. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You have dinner with a nice man, discover you have nothing in common, and politely decline to see him again. After Tessa left and Evelyn returned to her towel duties, Lila found herself alone with the photo again. She studied Marcus Reed's face, trying to see past the unflattering lighting and obvious exhaustion. There was something solid about him, even in the grainy image. Something that suggested he was exactly what her mother said: dependable. The problem was, Lila wasn't sure dependable was enough anymore. She spent the next hour setting the dining room table with her grandmother's good china. Simple white plates, delicate glasses, and candles that would provide forgiving lighting for whatever conversation awaited them. The Hard Inn had hosted countless dinners over the years, but this felt different, more personal, more like an audition. As 6:30 approached, Lila found herself changing clothes for the third time. The blue dress seemed too formal. The casual sundress felt too dismissive. She finally settled on a simple green cotton dress that brought out her eyes and made her feel like herself. Downstairs, she could hear her mother bustling in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of dinner preparation. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary drifted through the house, mixing with the salt air that always seemed to find its way inside. Lila checked her reflection one more time in the hallway mirror. Brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, minimal makeup, and an expression that she hoped conveyed openness rather than the anxiety churning in her stomach. The sound of tires on gravel announced the first arrival. Through the front window, she watched Pastor Glenn's familiar sedan pull up, followed immediately by a dark pickup truck. Her heart jumped. That would be Marcus. The truck door opened and a tall figure stepped out. Even from a distance, Lila could see this was not the man from the photograph. This Marcus Reed stood straight and moved with quiet confidence. When he turned toward the house, she caught a glimpse of broad shoulders and an ease in his movements that spoke of physical work and comfort in his own skin. "Oh," she breathed. Pastor Glenn was already walking up the front steps, his kind face creased in its perpetual gentle smile. Behind him, Marcus Reed climbed the porch steps with measured strides. As he drew closer to the window, Lila could see his face more clearly. Strong jawline, warm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment, and a face that was most definitely not plain. The doorbell rang, and Lila realized she'd been standing frozen in the hallway like a teenager spying on the neighbors. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. "Good evening, Lila." Pastor Glenn's voice carried its usual warmth. "I'd like you to meet Marcus Reed." Marcus stepped forward, and Lila found herself looking up into eyes that were even kinder than they'd appeared from a distance. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of presence that filled a space without demanding attention. "Ms. Hart," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for having me for dinner." His voice was deep and quiet, with just a hint of amusement that made Lila wonder if he could sense her surprise. His handshake was firm and brief, the hands of someone who worked with tools and wasn't afraid of honest labor. "Please call me Lila, and thank you for coming." She stepped back to let them both inside. "I hope you didn't have any trouble finding the inn." "Not at all. I've driven past here plenty of times. Always thought it looked peaceful." Evelyn appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Pastor Glenn, Marcus, welcome. I hope everyone's hungry." As they moved toward the dining room, Lila found herself stealing glances at Marcus. He moved through the inn like someone comfortable in his surroundings, pausing to look at the old photographs lining the hallway without seeming nosy. "This is beautiful," he said, stopping in front of a black and white photo of the inn from the 1940s. "Your family's been here a long time." "My great-grandmother bought the property in 1938, Lila said. "It's been in the family ever since." That's something special, having roots like that. There was something in his voice, a note of genuine respect that made Lila look at him more closely. This wasn't polite dinner conversation. He meant it. They gathered around the dining table, Pastor Glenn offering a simple grace before Evelyn began serving the meal. The conversation started carefully, the way it always did when strangers were feeling each other out. "Marcus, I understand you work in construction," Evelyn said, passing him the bowl of roasted vegetables. "Carpentry mostly, framing and finish work. I specialize in structural repairs for older buildings." "That must be satisfying work," Pastor Glenn said. "Bringing old things back to life." Marcus nodded. "There's something honest about it. You can see what you've accomplished at the end of the day." Lila found herself studying his hands as he reached for his water glass. They were strong hands, with small scars and calluses that spoke of years of careful work. She thought about her own hands, soft from office work and moisturizer, and felt an unexpected moment of admiration. "Lila manages the inn," Evelyn said. "She's turned it into one of the most successful bed and breakfasts on the coast." "Mom," Lila felt her cheeks warm, "I just try to make sure our guests are comfortable." "Don't be modest," Marcus said. "I've heard people in town talk about this place. They always mention how welcoming it feels." The compliment caught Lila off guard. She was used to praise for the inn's efficiency or its charm, but welcoming felt more personal somehow. As the meal continued, the conversation began to flow more naturally. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the inn's history. Pastor Glenn shared news from the church community. Evelyn managed to work in several mentions of Marcus being dependable and steady, which made Lila want to disappear under the table. "I have to ask," Lila said during a lull in conversation. "That photo my mother sent me, when was it taken?" Marcus laughed, and the sound transformed his entire face. "That was my work identification from about 3 years ago. Taken after I'd been up for 36 hours straight, working on an emergency repair job after a storm." He shook his head. "I looked like a ghost who'd forgotten how to smile." "You looked exhausted," Lila said. "I was exhausted, but I'm guessing that's not the impression you wanted to make tonight." The honesty in his voice surprised her. "I'll admit, I was nervous." "About having dinner with a stranger your mother picked out?" "I can't imagine why." His eyes twinkled with humor that took any sting out of the words. Even Evelyn smiled at that. After dinner, as they cleared the table together, Marcus insisted on helping with the dishes despite Evelyn's protests. Lila found herself working beside him at the kitchen sink, aware of how he moved efficiently around the space without getting in anyone's way. "This week," Pastor Glenn said as they finished cleaning up, "is meant to be about getting to know each other without pressure. No expectations beyond friendship and honest conversation." "I'd like that," Marcus said, glancing at Lila. "If you're comfortable with it." Lila looked at this man who was nothing like the photo had suggested, nothing like the duty-bound arrangement she'd expected. "I think I'd like that too." They moved to the front porch as the evening air began to cool. The scent of pine mixed with salt from the nearby ocean, and somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded its low, mournful note. "It's peaceful here," Marcus said, settling into one of the wicker chairs. "I love this time of day," Lila said. "When the guests are settled in for the night and everything gets quiet." "What time do you usually start in the morning?" 6:30, coffee first, then I check on breakfast prep and make sure everything's ready for checkout." "Early bird," Marcus smiled. "I'm usually on job sites by 7, so I understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the evening sounds of the small coastal town settling into night. "Would you like to get coffee tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "I know a place near the harbor that makes decent coffee and won't feel like a date." Lila considered this. "That sounds nice. Low pressure?" "Exactly." He stood up, and Pastor Glenn began gathering his things as well. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Hart. Everything was delicious." "It was our pleasure," Evelyn said, though Lila could see the calculating look in her mother's eyes as she watched Marcus. As the two men walked to their vehicles, Marcus turned back toward the porch. "9 o'clock work for you?" he called. "Perfect," Lila called back. She watched his truck disappear down the tree-lined drive, then turned to find her mother studying her with interest. "Well?" Evelyn said. "Well, what? What do you think?" Lila considered her words carefully. "I think he's nothing like his photograph." "Is that good or bad?" "I'm not sure yet." Lila headed toward the front door. "But I'm curious to find out." As she got ready for bed that night, Lila found herself replaying moments from the evening. The way Marcus had listened when she talked about the inn. How he'd insisted on helping with dishes without being asked. The gentle humor in his voice when he'd acknowledged the awkwardness of their situation. Most surprising of all was how natural it had felt once they'd gotten past the initial nervousness. Like talking to someone she'd known much longer than one evening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "How did it go? Still planning to join a convent?" Lila smiled as she typed back. "Definitely not joining a convent." "That good?" "That complicated." She set the phone aside and looked out her bedroom window toward the harbor, where lights from fishing boats dotted the dark water. Tomorrow, she'd have coffee with Marcus Reed and try to figure out whether this feeling in her chest was hope or just surprise. Either way, it was more than she'd felt in a very long time. The tide was coming in, and she could hear the gentle sound of waves against the rocks below. It was the same sound that had lulled her to sleep since childhood, but tonight it felt like the beginning of something new. The morning sun painted the harbor in shades of gold and blue as Lila locked the inn's office door behind her. She'd spent the early hours handling checkout procedures and answering emails, but her mind kept drifting to the coffee meeting ahead. Marcus was waiting by the harbor's edge, hands in his pockets, watching a fishing boat make its way back to shore. He'd traded the previous night's button-down shirt for worn jeans and a navy t-shirt that showed off arms clearly accustomed to physical work. "Good morning," she called as she approached. He turned with that same easy smile she'd noticed the night before. "Morning. Ready for the best coffee on the coast?" "That's quite a promise." "I don't make promises I can't keep." They walked toward Harborside Coffee, a small shop tucked between the bait store and a gallery selling local art. The morning was crisp but warming, with seagulls wheeling overhead and the steady sound of rigging clanging in the gentle breeze. "Tell me about your work," Lila said as they found a table by the window. "What kind of repairs do you do?" Marcus stirred cream into his coffee thoughtfully. "Mostly older buildings that need structural work. Last month I spent 3 weeks rebuilding the support beams under the Mackenzie place. You know the big Victorian up on Elm Street? The blue one with all the gingerbread trim? That's the one. Mrs. Mackenzie is 86 and determined to keep that house in the family. The foundation was settling badly, but she couldn't afford to tear it down and start over." Lila watched his face as he talked. There was genuine satisfaction in his voice, the way someone sounds when they love what they do. "Did you save it?" "We did. Took some creative engineering and a lot of patience, but that house will outlast all of us now." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you? How did you end up running the inn?" "I sort of fell into it," Lila admitted. "I studied business in college, Came home to help out for what was supposed to be one summer, and never left. Do you regret it? The question caught her off guard. Most people assumed running a family business was either a blessing or a burden, but Marcus seemed genuinely curious about how she felt about her choice. Some days, she said honestly, especially when I see my college friends posting pictures from business trips to Paris or promotions at tech companies. But then, I'll have a guest tell me this place helped them reconnect with their spouse, or I'll watch a family make memories on our front porch, and I remember why I stayed. It's your place in the world. Exactly. She looked at him with surprise. Most people don't understand that. I think people need roots more than they admit. Something steady to come home to. They walked the harbor after coffee, past fishing boats and pleasure craft bobbing in the protected water. Marcus pointed out the different types of boats and their uses, while Lila shared stories about the town's history and the families who'd lived here for generations. That's the Moreau's boat, she said, nodding toward a well-maintained lobster boat. Jean-Paul's been fishing these waters for 40 years. His son Tommy just joined him full-time. Family business? Like the inn, some traditions are worth keeping. They paused at the end of the pier, where a few early tourists were already taking photos of the scenic view. The morning had grown warmer, and Lila found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. Of course. This whole arrangement, how do you feel about it? Really? Lila considered her answer carefully. Yesterday, I felt like I was being set up for the world's most awkward dinner party. Today, she gestured between them. This doesn't feel awkward. No, it doesn't. Marcus leaned against the pier railing. I'll be honest, I almost didn't come. The whole thing felt too much like my grandmother trying to manage my life. What changed your mind? Pastor Glenn. He said it wasn't about managing anything, just two people deciding if they wanted to spend some time together. Marcus turned to look at her. No pressure, no expectations. And what do you think so far? I think I'd like to spend more time together, if you're interested. The simple directness of his words sent a flutter through Lila's chest. I'm interested. As they walked back toward town, Lila's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How did Coffee go? Is he coming to help with the banister? Lila had forgotten about the loose banister on the inn's main staircase. It had been on her to-do list for weeks, but she kept putting off calling a handyman. My mother wants to know if you're coming to look at our banister, she said, showing Marcus the text. Is it actually loose, or is this your mother's way of extending the visit? Lila laughed. It's actually loose. One of our guests mentioned it yesterday, and I've been meaning to fix it. I could take a look if you want. Bring some tools tomorrow morning? You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I'd like to. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. Lila, I'm not here because Pastor Glenn or your mother think it's a good idea. I'm here because I want to be. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. When was the last time someone had said something like that to her and meant it? Okay, she said, but I'm helping. Deal. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the inn with a well-organized toolbox and the kind of focused energy that suggested he approached all tasks with the same methodical care. Lila had prepared by moving the hall table away from the stairs and laying out drop cloths to protect the hardwood floor. Good thinking, he said, examining her preparations. You've done this before. I've learned that preparation saves time later. Marcus ran his hand along the banister, testing its stability. The bracket's coming loose from the wall. Probably just needs longer screws and maybe a wall anchor. How long will it take? Hour, maybe 2. Depends on what I find when I open it up. Lila brought him a glass of lemonade and settled nearby with her laptop, ostensibly to work on invoices, but really to watch him work. There was something soothing about the competent way he approached the problem, testing each connection point and explaining what he was finding. "The original builder did good work," he said, removing the first bracket. "This is solid craftsmanship. My great-grandfather built most of the additions himself. He was a carpenter before he bought the inn. It shows. See this joint work? That's old-school attention to detail." As he worked, guests passed on their way to and from breakfast, several stopping to chat. Marcus was polite and friendly without being overly familiar, and Lila noticed how he instinctively stepped aside to let people pass safely. "You're good with people," she observed during a quiet moment. "Construction sites teach you to work around others. Safety first, but kindness doesn't hurt." Her phone buzzed with a text from Deshawn. "You behaving yourself over there?" Marcus glanced at the screen and grinned. "Deshawn's my crew leader. He thinks he's my big brother." "What would he say if he knew you were here?" "Probably that it's about time I did something other than work and sleep." "Is that all you do?" Marcus paused in his measuring to look at her. "Pretty much. I help my sister Nia when she needs it, volunteer with the fire department, but mostly I work." "That sounds lonely." "It wasn't always, but after my last relationship ended, I decided to focus on things I could control." He returned to his measuring. "What about you? All work and no play?" "I have Tessa, and I read a lot, and sometimes I take long walks on the beach and pretend I'm being romantic instead of just avoiding my mother's questions about my personal life." Marcus laughed. "How often does she ask?" "Daily." "And now?" "Now she's probably planning our engagement party based on the fact that you're fixing our banister." As if summoned by their conversation, Evelyn appeared with a plate of homemade cookies and what Lila recognized as her best china plate. "Marcus, dear, you must be hungry. I brought some snacks." "That's very kind, Mrs. Hart. Thank you." Evelyn hovered for a moment, clearly wanting to ask questions, but restrained by some internal sense of propriety. Finally, she settled on, "Everything going smoothly?" "Perfect," Marcus said. "The repair should hold for another 50 years. "Wonderful. Lila, don't forget we're having dinner Friday evening. Nothing fancy, just family and Pastor Glenn." Lila's stomach dropped. Her mother's nothing fancy dinners were typically anything but simple. "Mom, we talked about keeping things low-key." "Of course, dear, very low-key. Marcus, I hope you'll join us. 6:30? Marcus glanced at Lila, who nodded slightly. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Hart." After Evelyn left, Marcus returned to his work with what Lila suspected was studied focus. "You don't have to come to dinner if you don't want to," she said. "Do you want me to come?" "Yes, but I should warn you, when my mother says just family, she usually means half the town will somehow show up." "As long as you're there, I can handle whatever your mother has planned." The simple statement made Lila's pulse quicken. She was beginning to understand that Marcus Reed said exactly what he meant, without drama or hidden meanings. Thursday evening arrived gray and humid, with the kind of thick air that suggested a storm was building offshore. Marcus arrived early to help move chairs from the inn storage room to the dining area, and Lila found herself watching how he lifted and carried things with the same careful efficiency he'd shown with the banister repair. "Weather Service is calling for a coastal storm," he said, setting down the last chair. "Nothing too serious, but we might see some wind and rain tonight." "The inn's weathered worse," Lila said, "but I should check the emergency supplies before dinner." "Want help?" Together, They gathered flashlights, batteries, and extra towels from the inn's emergency closet. Marcus tested each flashlight and replaced batteries where needed, while Lila checked that the backup generator had fuel. "You're well prepared," he observed. "You have to be in this business. Guests don't care if the power goes out. They still expect hot coffee in the morning." As they worked, Lila became increasingly aware of Marcus's presence beside her. The way he moved with quiet confidence, how he seemed to anticipate what needed to be done without being asked. When their hands brushed, reaching for the same box of batteries, she felt that same flutter in her chest she'd experienced at the harbor. "Lila?" Evelyn's voice called from the kitchen. "Could you help me with something?" In the kitchen, Evelyn was arranging flowers with the kind of precision usually reserved for military operations. "The table looks beautiful, Mom." "I want everything to be perfect." Evelyn paused in her arranging. "He seems like a good man." "He is." "And you like him?" It wasn't really a question, but Lila nodded anyway. "I do." "I'm glad." Evelyn's voice was softer than usual. "After Richard, I worried you'd given up on finding someone good." The admission surprised Lila. "I wasn't sure I wanted to find anyone." "And now?" Lila looked toward the dining room, where she could hear Marcus quietly setting up the additional chairs. "Now I'm thinking maybe it's worth trying again." The storm rolled in just as Pastor Glenn arrived, bringing with it the first heavy drops of rain and a wind that rattled the inn's windows. Marcus had correctly predicted the timing. By 7 o'clock, they were settling down to dinner with the sound of rain drumming against the glass. "Good thing we're all safely inside," Pastor Glenn said, accepting a glass of wine from Evelyn. The dinner conversation was easier than Lila had expected. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about Pastor Glenn's work in the community, shared stories about rebuilding a church damaged in the previous year's storms, and managed to deflect Evelyn's more pointed questions with gentle humor. "Do you have family nearby, Marcus?" Evelyn asked as she served dessert. "My sister Nia lives about 20 minutes away. She's a nurse at the regional hospital." "And your parents?" "They passed away when I was in college. Car accident." Marcus's voice remained steady, but Lila caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Nia and I have looked out for each other since then." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, her matchmaking agenda temporarily forgotten in the face of genuine sympathy. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but family becomes more important when there's less of it." The lights flickered as if to emphasize his point, and everyone looked up at the chandelier with concern. "Should I check the generator?" Lila asked. "Let me," Marcus said, rising from his chair. "Where's the switch?" As if his words had been a cue, the lights went out completely, plunging the dining room into darkness broken only by the candles Evelyn had placed on the table. "Well," Pastor Glenn said with cheerful resignation, "this should be an adventure." Marcus found the generator and got it running within minutes, but the main power remained out. They gathered in the inn's front lounge with battery-powered lanterns, where several guests had already assembled with varying degrees of concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lila announced to the small group, "we've got backup power for essential systems, plenty of lanterns, and enough hot coffee to last until morning. Think of it as an authentic colonial inn experience." A nervous laugh rippled through the group, but Marcus stepped forward with the kind of calm authority that immediately put people at ease. "The storm should pass by midnight," he said. "Your rooms are completely safe, and we'll have the lights back on as soon as the power company can get to the lines." One elderly guest, Mrs. Patterson, looked particularly worried. "What if there's an emergency?" "I'm a volunteer firefighter," Marcus said. "If anyone needs anything at all, just ask. We'll make sure everyone stays comfortable and safe." For the next several hours, they turned the power outage into an impromptu gathering. Marcus helped distribute lanterns and checked on guests who seemed nervous. Lila organized a simple tea service and encouraged people to share stories by lantern light. Around 11 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson started feeling dizzy on the stairs. Marcus immediately went to help, supporting her weight and speaking in the same calm, reassuring voice he'd used earlier. "Take your time, Mrs. Patterson. There's no hurry. Lila, could you bring one of those chairs?" Together, they settled the elderly woman in a comfortable spot and made sure she had water and someone to sit with her. Marcus checked her pulse and breathing with the competence of someone trained in emergency response. "You should be fine," he told Mrs. Patterson. "But let's have you stay down here where there's more light and company, just to be safe." "You're very kind," Mrs. Patterson said, patting his hand. As the evening wound down and guests gradually returned to their rooms, Lila found herself alone with Marcus in the now quiet lobby. The storm had begun to ease, and the worst of the wind had passed. "Thank you," she said, "for everything tonight. It's what anyone would do." "No, it's not." Lila settled into the chair beside him. "Most people would have waited for someone else to take charge." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful in the lantern light. "My dad always said that if you can help, you should help. No questions, no credit needed." "He sounds like a good man." "He was. He would have liked you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than all of Evelyn's careful dinner planning, or Pastor Glenn's talk of discernment. "Marcus," Lila said softly, "I'm glad you came tonight." "So am I." The lights flickered back on suddenly, flooding the lobby with electric brightness that seemed harsh after hours of gentle lantern glow. They both blinked in the sudden illumination, and Lila became aware of how close they'd been sitting in the darkness. "Power's back," Marcus observed unnecessarily. "It is." Neither of them moved to turn off the lanterns or gather up the emergency supplies. The magic of the storm-bound evening felt too fragile to break with practical concerns. "I should probably head home," Marcus said eventually. "Let you get some sleep." "Probably." Lila didn't want him to leave, but she couldn't think of a reasonable excuse to ask him to stay. As he gathered his jacket, Marcus paused by her chair. "Would you like to take a walk tomorrow? Check on how the town weathered the storm?" "I'd like that very much." "Good." He smiled, the same genuine expression that had been surprising her all week. "Sleep well, Layla." After he left, Lila sat in the restored electric light for a few more minutes, replaying the evening. The way Marcus had instinctively stepped up when help was needed. How naturally he'd taken care of Mrs. Patterson. The quiet confidence he'd shown throughout the crisis. Most of all, she thought about the moment when he'd said his father would have liked her. It was the kind of thing people said casually, but Marcus Reed didn't seem to say anything casually. As she finally turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Lila realized that somewhere during the past few days, the careful boundaries of their discernment week had begun to blur. What had started as a polite experiment was beginning to feel like something much more significant. And for the first time since Richard's betrayal, that didn't scare her. It felt like hope. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of sparkling air that follows a good storm. Lila walked through the inn's grounds early, checking for damage and finding only a few small branches and scattered leaves. The power of the previous night's weather seemed almost impossible to believe in the gentle morning light. She was sweeping pine needles from the front porch when Marcus's truck pulled into the drive. He climbed out carrying 2 coffee cups and what appeared to be fresh pastries. "Thought you might need fuel for storm cleanup," he said, offering her one of the cups. "You're going to spoil me," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. That's the plan. They walked the property together, Marcus pointing out potential weak spots in the inn's older trees and suggesting preventive trimming that could help in future storms. His observations were practical and helpful, but Lila found herself watching his face more than listening to his words. The big oak by the back garden took some stress, he said, running his hand along the trunk. See these cracks in the bark? It's not dangerous now, but you might want to have a tree service look at it. I'll call them Monday. What about your place? Any damage? Just some shingles that need replacing. Nothing major. Marcus straightened and looked back toward the inn. You've got a solid place here, Lila. Your great-grandfather built it to last. They walked down to the harbor to check on the boats and docks. Several fishing vessels were already heading out for the day, their engines puttering steadily through water that showed no trace of the previous night's turmoil. It always amazes me how quickly everything returns to normal, Lila said, watching a gull dive for fish near the pier. That's the thing about storms, Marcus replied. They feel overwhelming when you're in them, but they pass. Life keeps going. Something in his tone made Lila glance at him. Are we still talking about weather? Marcus smiled ruefully. Maybe not entirely. They found a bench near the water's edge and sat watching the harbor activity. The morning was warming up, and Lila felt herself relaxing in the comfortable silence between them. Can I ask you about your last relationship? She said after a while. Marcus was quiet for so long that Lila began to worry she'd overstepped. Finally, he spoke. Her name was Carla. We dated for almost 2 years. He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. She was smart, ambitious, had her whole career mapped out. What happened? Her parents happened. They made it clear that a carpenter wasn't what they'd had in mind for their daughter's future. Marcus tossed the stone into the water. The thing is, I could have handled that, but Carla started agreeing with them, suggesting I go back to school, maybe get into project management, or start my own company. She wanted you to change. She wanted me to be someone else, someone more suitable. Marcus looked at Lila directly. I realized she was embarrassed by what I do, by who I am, and I decided I'd rather be alone than spend my life apologizing for myself. Lila felt something twist in her chest at the pain underlying his calm words. I'm sorry. That must have hurt. It did, but it also taught me something important. Marcus shifted on the bench to face her. I'd rather have someone choose me as I am than try to remake myself for someone who doesn't actually want me. The honesty in his voice made Lila's pulse quicken. She thought about Richard, who had seemed to appreciate her efficiency and reliability, but had ultimately left her feeling like a well-organized accessory to his ambitions. Richard used to introduce me as his fiancée who runs that little inn, she said, like it was a charming hobby instead of my life's work. Little inn, Marcus repeated with a shake of his head. This place employs how many people? 8, counting seasonal help. Right, a small business that supports 8 families and serves hundreds of guests every year. Real small operation. His indignation on her behalf was both touching and attractive. Lila found herself smiling despite the painful memory. Thank you for that. For what? For understanding why the inn matters. They walked back through town, stopping to help an elderly neighbor clear a fallen branch from his driveway. Marcus produced a small chainsaw from his truck and made quick work of the cleanup, while Lila gathered the smaller pieces. You just carry a chainsaw around? She asked as they loaded the last of the wood into the neighbor's wheelbarrow. Basic emergency kit. Chainsaw, first aid supplies, tow straps, jumper cables. Marcus latched his tailgate. You never know when someone might need help. Boy Scout? Something like that. As they drove back to the inn, Lila's phone rang. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen, and Lila answered with some trepidation. Honey, I have wonderful news. Her mother's voice bubbled through the speaker. I've been talking to Janet Morrison. You remember she writes for the society section of the paper, and she's very interested in doing a feature story about the inn, especially if there's a romantic angle to write about. Lila's stomach dropped. Mom, we talked about this. I know, dear, but think of the publicity. And if you and Marcus are getting serious, wouldn't it be lovely to have a proper announcement? Maybe a nice engagement dinner where we could invite some important people? Marcus, who could clearly hear Evelyn's end of the conversation, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We're not ready for announcements or dinner parties, Lila said firmly. We're still getting to know each other. But surely you must have some sense of where things are heading. It's been almost a week. Mom, we're not in a business merger. These things take time. Of course, dear. I'm just excited for you. Call me later? After Lila hung up, they drove in silence for a few minutes. Sorry about that, she said finally. Your mother means well. She does, but she also sees every relationship as a potential solution to what she considers my problem. Which is? Being unmarried at 29 in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. Marcus pulled into the inn's parking area and turned off the engine. For what it's worth, I don't think you have a problem. Even though I'm 29 and single? Especially because you're 29 and single and still know what you want. Marcus turned in his seat to look at her. A lot of people our age are married to the wrong person because they were more afraid of being alone than of being unhappy. The observation was so accurate, it took Lila's breath away. Is that what you think I was doing with Richard? I think you know the answer to that better than I do. She did know. Richard had been safe, predictable, and socially appropriate. She'd convinced herself that was enough because the alternative, waiting for something real, felt too risky. I was scared, she admitted. Scared of ending up like my cousin Beth, who's 42 and still waiting for Prince Charming. Scared of becoming the inn spinster who everyone feels sorry for. And now? Lila looked at Marcus, taking in his honest face and patient eyes. Now I'm thinking maybe it's better to wait for the right person than to settle for the available person. I agree. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Lila realized they'd crossed some invisible line in their relationship. The polite getting-to-know-you phase was over. This was becoming real. Marcus? Yeah? Would you like to have a picnic tomorrow? Just us, somewhere quiet. His smile was answer enough, but he said yes anyway. Sunday afternoon found them on a bluff overlooking the ocean, sharing sandwiches and fruit from a basket Lila had packed. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and salt water. This is my favorite spot, Lila said, stretching out on the blanket. I used to come here as a kid when I needed to think. I can see why. Marcus leaned back on his elbows, surveying the view. You can see for miles. What do you think about when you look at all that water? Marcus considered the question seriously. How small we are, how temporary everything is, but also how beautiful it is right now, in this moment. Lila turned to study his profile as he gazed out at the horizon. There was something peaceful about Marcus that she was beginning to recognize as one of his most attractive qualities. He didn't seem to need constant stimulation or validation. He was comfortable with quiet, with his own thoughts. What about you? He asked. What do you think about? Possibilities. all the places that water connects to, all the lives it touches. She plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just follow it somewhere. Have you traveled much? Some. College in Boston, a few vacations with friends. But I always come back here. Because of the inn? Because this is home. Lila looked at Marcus. Does that make me small-minded? Unambitious? It makes you someone who knows what matters to her. Marcus shifted closer on the blanket. There's something to be said for that kind of clarity. They talked about dreams and disappointments, about the difference between wanting something and needing it. Marcus told her about his volunteer work with the fire department, how it had started as a way to honor his father's memory and had become one of the most meaningful parts of his life. There's something about helping in a crisis, he said. Everything becomes very clear, very simple. Either you can help or you can't. Either you do something useful or you don't. Is that why you liked last night? During the storm? Part of it, but mostly I liked watching you take care of everyone. The way you made people feel safe without making a big show of it. The compliment warmed Lila in a way that felt both pleasant and unsettling. She wasn't used to having someone notice the careful work that went into making things look effortless. As the afternoon stretched on, their conversation grew more personal. Marcus told her about his parents, how they'd supported each other through his father's early struggles to build a construction business. Lila shared memories of growing up in the inn, the strange mix of public and private that came with living in a place where strangers were always coming and going. Did you ever feel like you didn't have a normal childhood? Marcus asked. Sometimes, but I also got to meet people from all over the world. I learned that there are 1,000 different ways to live a life, and most of them can work if you're honest about what you want. And what do you want? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Lila looked at Marcus, really looked at him, taking in the genuine interest in his eyes, the way he listened to her answers as if they mattered. I want to matter to someone, she said finally. Not because of what I can do for them or how I make them look, but because of who I am. You matter to me. The simple statement made Lila's heart race. Marcus, I know it's only been a week. I know this whole situation is strange and artificial. But you matter to me, Lila. The way you think, the way you care about people, the way you make everyone around you feel welcome and safe. Marcus reached for her hand. I want you to know that. Before Lila could respond, Marcus leaned closer and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. When they finally broke apart, Lila felt slightly dizzy. Oh, she breathed. Good-o or bad-o? Definitely good-o. They kissed again, longer this time, and Lila felt something settle into place in her chest. This was what she'd been waiting for without knowing it, this feeling of rightness, of coming home to someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was beginning to set, painting the ocean in shades of gold and pink. We should probably head back, Marcus said, though he made no move to pack up the picnic. Probably. Lila's phone buzzed with a text message, but she ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. This moment, this feeling, was too important to interrupt. But the phone buzzed again, and then again. Finally, Marcus gently suggested she check it. The first message was from Tessa. Call me when you get this. The second was from her cousin Paige. Saw the post. So sorry. The third was from a number she didn't recognize. Guess you settled after all. With growing dread, Lila opened her social media app. There, posted by someone named Jennifer Walsh, was Marcus's old work ID photo with the caption, "When the heart-in heiress can't do better than this. Some women really do settle. Desperate or dumb." The post already had dozens of likes and several mean-spirited comments. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus, noticing her expression, moved closer to see the screen. "Oh no," she whispered. Marcus stared at the post for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he handed her phone back and began packing up the picnic with mechanical precision. "Marcus, did you show that photo to anyone before we met?" His voice was carefully controlled. Lila's heart sank. "Tessa, and I mentioned to Paige that I was nervous about meeting someone based on an unflattering photo." Marcus nodded slowly, still packing. "I see. I didn't mean for this to happen. I would never. I know you wouldn't." Marcus stood up, basket in hand. "But it did happen." The drive back to the inn was silent except for the sound of Lila's phone buzzing with more messages. She turned it face down, but the damage was done. The perfect afternoon had been shattered by the cruel reminder that nothing in a small town stayed private for long. At the inn, Marcus walked her to the door with the same politeness he'd shown that first night, but the warmth was gone from his eyes. "I need some time to think," he said quietly. "Marcus, please, don't let this ruin everything." "It's not ruined, but I need to figure out if I can handle being with someone whose family and friends see me as a disappointment they have to tolerate." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "I won't put either of us through that." After he left, Lila sat on her front porch and cried for the first time since Richard's betrayal. But these tears felt different. Not the angry tears of wounded pride, but the devastating tears of lost possibility. She'd found something real, something worth fighting for. And now she might have lost it before it had truly begun. Monday morning came gray and drizzling, matching Lila's mood perfectly. She'd spent most of the previous night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the picnic, and wondering how something so beautiful had turned so painful so quickly. The social media post had been taken down sometime after midnight, whether by Jennifer Walsh herself or by the platform's moderators. Lila didn't know and didn't care. But the damage was done. By now, half the town had probably seen it. Tessa arrived at 8 o'clock with coffee and determination written across her face. "Okay," she said, settling into the kitchen chair across from Lila. "Tell me everything." Lila recounted the previous day, from the perfect picnic to the devastating discovery. As she talked, she could see Tessa's expression grow increasingly angry. "Jennifer Walsh," Tessa said when Lila finished. "I should have known. She's been bitter ever since her divorce, and she's always resented anyone who seems happy. It doesn't matter who posted it. What matters is that Marcus thinks I'm ashamed of him." "Are you?" "No." The word came out louder than Lila intended. "God, no. Tessa, he's everything I didn't know I was looking for." "Then fight for him." "How?" "He asked for time to think. I can't force him to trust me." Tessa leaned forward. "Lila, honey, you're one of the strongest people I know. You've built this inn into something special. You've weathered your mother's matchmaking schemes, and you survived Richard's betrayal. Don't let one bitter woman's social media post ruin the best thing that's happened to you in years." After Tessa left for work, Lila threw herself into inn business with desperate focus. She updated guest files, reorganized the supply closet, and responded to booking inquiries with military precision. But no amount of productivity could quiet the voice in her head that kept replaying Marcus's words. I need to figure out if I can handle being with someone whose family and friends see me as a disappointment. Around noon, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer when she saw it was her mother, but avoiding Evelyn would only make things worse. "Lila, dear, I just heard about that awful post. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom. This is exactly why I suggested a proper announcement. Control the narrative before someone else does." Evelyn's voice carried that particular tone that meant she was building up to something. "I've been thinking, and I still believe a nice engagement dinner would solve this whole problem. Show everyone that this is a serious relationship, not some experiment." "Mom, there's not going to be an engagement dinner." "But surely, there's not going to be an engagement." The words came out harsher than Lila intended. "Marcus needs time to think, and honestly, I don't blame him." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Lila wondered if the call had dropped. "I see," Evelyn said finally. "Lila, I hope you know that I never intended—" "I know, but good intentions don't always prevent hurt feelings." After the call ended, Lila sat in her office staring at the guest reservation system without really seeing it. She understood Marcus's reaction, but it still felt like a door slamming shut on the best possibility she'd had in years. Tuesday passed in a blur of routine tasks and forced normalcy. Wednesday brought a brief text from Marcus. "Taking some time to think. We'll call you soon." It was polite, distant, and told her absolutely nothing about what he was actually thinking. Thursday evening, Lila was arranging fresh flowers in the lobby when she heard a truck door slam outside. Her heart jumped, but when she looked out the window, she saw Deshaun Carter walking up the front steps. She opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Carter, this is a surprise." "Miss Hart, could I have a word?" Deshaun was a big man with kind eyes and the kind of direct manner that suggested he didn't waste time on small talk. Lila invited him into the lobby, her curiosity growing. "It's about Marcus," Deshaun said without preamble. "He's been walking around the job site like someone died, and frankly, it's starting to affect the work." "I'm sorry to hear that. I saw that post, the one that got taken down." Deshaun's expression hardened. "Cruel thing to do to a good man." Lila felt her cheeks burn. "I had nothing to do with that post." "I know you didn't, but Marcus is... he's proud. Maybe too proud for his own good sometimes." Deshaun leaned forward in his chair. "He's convinced himself that your world and his world don't mix, that he'll always be the carpenter trying to fit in with the inn owner's family. That's not how I see him." "I believe you, but Marcus has been hurt before, by someone who wanted him to be different than he is, and now he's scared it's happening again." Lila felt a flutter of hope. "What do you think I should do?" "Fight for him, but not with words. Marcus has heard plenty of words before. Show him. Make it clear to everyone who matters that you're choosing him exactly as he is." After Deshaun left, Lila sat in the lobby thinking about his words. Show, don't tell. Make it clear she was choosing Marcus. But how? Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Nia Reed knocked on the inn's front door just as Lila was finishing the breakfast cleanup. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," Nia said. "I'm between shifts at the hospital, and I wanted to meet the woman who's got my brother so twisted up." Nia was petite and pretty, with Marcus's same warm eyes and an energy that suggested she didn't have much patience for nonsense. "Would you like some coffee?" Lila offered. "Please. And maybe you could tell me what happened. Marcus won't talk about it, which means he's really hurting." Over coffee and leftover muffins, Lila told Nia about the picnic, the post, and Marcus's reaction. Nia listened without interrupting, her expression growing thoughtful. "That sounds like Marcus," she said when Lila finished. "He gets hurt, and instead of fighting, he pulls back, tries to protect himself by expecting the worst. I don't know how to convince him that I don't care what other people think." "You probably can't convince him with words. Marcus is a show-me-don't-tell-me kind of person." Nia studied Lila's face. "But I think you already know that." "Everyone keeps telling me to fight for him, but I'm not sure how to fight for someone who won't let me near enough to try. Marcus will be at the church supper Saturday night. It's a monthly thing, potluck dinner, nothing fancy. Half the town will be there." Nia smiled. "Including Jennifer Walsh, if I had to guess." "You think I should go?" "I think you should go and make it very clear where you stand. Not with speeches or dramatics. Just be yourself. Be the woman he fell for." Saturday evening arrived cool and clear, with the kind of crisp air that made everything seem possible. Lila spent longer than usual getting ready, finally settling on a simple blue dress and her grandmother's pearl earrings. She wanted to look like herself, not like she was trying too hard. The church fellowship hall was buzzing with conversation and the clatter of dishes when Lila arrived. She'd brought a casserole, her great-grandmother's recipe for tuna noodle bake that was nothing fancy, but always popular at community gatherings. She spotted Marcus almost immediately. He was standing near the serving table with Nia, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in khakis and a button-down shirt. When he saw her, his expression went carefully neutral. "Lila." Pastor Glenn appeared at her elbow with a warm smile. "How wonderful that you could join us. Let me take that casserole." As Pastor Glenn led her toward the food table, Lila became aware of the subtle shift in conversation around her. People were watching, waiting to see what would happen. She caught sight of Jennifer Walsh near the dessert table, wearing an expression of smug curiosity. "Marcus?" Pastor Glenn said cheerfully. "Look who's here." Marcus nodded politely. "Lila, good to see you." The formal distance in his voice made Lila's heart ache, but she managed a smile. "You too." They stood there for a moment, the weight of unfinished conversation heavy between them. Then Nia appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Lila, I'm so glad you came. Have you met my brother's crew leader, Deshawn? And this is his wife, Carmen." For the next hour, Lila circulated through the room, chatting with neighbors and acquaintances with genuine warmth. She complimented Mrs. Patterson on her recovery from the storm night dizzy spell. She listened to Jean-Paul Moreau's stories about the fishing season. She helped serve dessert and wipe down tables without being asked. She was simply herself, the person Marcus had gotten to know over their week together, and she was very aware that Marcus was watching. As the evening wound down and people began clearing dishes, Lila found herself standing near Jennifer Walsh by the coffee station. "Lila," Jennifer said with false sweetness. "I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you might be laying low after that unfortunate social media incident." The room seemed to grow quieter, as if people were straining to hear the conversation. "Actually," Lila said, keeping her voice calm and friendly, "I wanted to thank you for taking that post down. It must have been embarrassing to realize how wrong you were about Marcus." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Wrong?" "The photo you posted. It was from when Marcus had been working for 36 hours straight on an emergency repair after a storm. He was exhausted from helping people rebuild their homes." Lila's voice remained pleasant, but it carried clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "I think anyone who saw him helping Mrs. Patterson during our power outage or watched him volunteer his time to help neighbors clean up storm damage would understand the difference between a bad photo and a good man." I was just making a joke." "I'm sure you were." But jokes about someone's appearance can be really hurtful, don't you think? Lila smiled gently. I'm just glad people in this town are smart enough to judge someone by their character, instead of an unflattering picture. Jennifer mumbled something that might have been an apology, and quickly moved away. Gradually, conversation resumed around the room, but Lila was aware of approving nods and small smiles from several people. As she gathered her empty casserole dish, Marcus appeared beside her. That was well done, he said quietly. I just told the truth. You didn't have to defend me. Lila turned to face him fully. Yes, I did. Because you're worth defending, and because I care about you, and because that's what people do for each other. When they... She stopped herself before saying words that felt too big for a church fellowship hall. When they what? Marcus asked softly. When they matter to each other. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Around them, the cleanup continued, but Lila felt like they were in a bubble of quiet. I've been thinking, Marcus said finally. And I think I've been scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of not being enough. He glanced around the room, where people were chatting and laughing and treating them both with easy familiarity. But mostly scared of wanting something so much that losing it would break me. Lila's heart clenched. Marcus. I'm tired of being scared, he continued. And I'm tired of letting other people's opinions matter more than my own feelings. What are your feelings? Marcus smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. That I'm falling in love with a woman who makes tuna noodle casserole and stands up to bullies and makes everyone around her feel like they matter. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. I'm falling in love with you too. Even though I'm just a carpenter who carries chainsaws in his truck? Especially because you're a carpenter who carries chainsaws in his truck. Marcus laughed, and the sound dissolved the last of the tension between them. So what now? Now we stop letting other people write our story. Lila reached for his hand. And we see what happens when two people choose each other in the light? 3 weeks later, on a perfect October Sunday, Marcus knelt on the dock behind the Hard Inn with a simple ring and a simple question. Marry me, he said, and let's build a life together. Nothing fancy, nothing for show, just us, choosing each other every day. Lila said yes through happy tears, and they kissed as the afternoon sun turned the water to gold around them. The wedding, 2 months later, was exactly what they'd both wanted. 40 guests in the inn's backyard, simple white lights strung between the trees, and vows they'd written themselves about kindness, honesty, and the courage to love without reservation. Evelyn cried during the ceremony, and later admitted to Tessa that she'd never seen her daughter look so happy. Deshawn served as Marcus's best man and made a toast about finding someone who sees your worth. Nia caught the bouquet and immediately began planning her own wedding to the doctor she'd been quietly dating for months. And as the evening wound down and the last guests headed home, Marcus and Lila sat on the dock with their shoes off, toes trailing in the cool water. No regrets? Marcus asked, playing with her new wedding ring. Only one, Lila said. What's that? I wish I'd met you sooner. Marcus smiled and pulled her closer. I think we met exactly when we were supposed to, when we were ready for something real. Above them, the stars reflected in the calm water, and somewhere in the distance, the foghorn sounded its familiar note. It was the same sound Lila had fallen asleep to for most of her life, but tonight it felt like a blessing on their beginning. They had found what they'd both been looking for without knowing they were searching. Someone who saw them clearly, chose them completely, and loved them not despite their imperfections. but because of the whole truth of who they were. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, a real love story, built on honesty and trust, and the daily choice to see the best in each other. And as they sat together in the gentle night, planning the small good days ahead of them, both Marcus and Lila knew they had found their way home.